Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Social Club at the End of the World. We're going to first go around, do some quick updates from everyone on the latest in your world, and then we're going to jump into our other agenda items, update on work with the Catholic Church, and then another update on our colleges, the Sierra Club, and the San Francisco Bay Area. So we'll start with updates. We'll just go left to right. Dan, you want to start? And then followed by Jason, Miles, and Victoria. Take it away, Dan.
Yeah, hi, this is Dan from Chicago. Just a brief update, in Chicago, we're in the intense stage of a mayoral election campaign. And it's kind of interesting that none of the mayoral candidates really is able to stand out. And most of them have been tainted with, nepotistic types of arrangements or pay-to-play suggestions. Nothing unusual for Chicago. But what I notice and is really disheartening is to know that most of these candidates who are now running for mayor, the way it is in Chicago, the mayoral election happens, I think it's February 26th or something right at the end of February. The two highest vote getters will then be in the runoff, and then the actual election will be for mayor in April. If somebody were to get more than 50%, then we wouldn't need to go to April. But right now we have a number of people who are running. 4 or 5 people could emerge, but again, they have been tainted with their connection to this famous Chicago alderman named Ed Burke, who, by the way, is the lawyer. He's an alderman and a lawyer who handled Donald Trump's real estate tax situation here in Chicago. And he's recently, the feds have got him, and they had somebody wearing a wire. Anyway, all I'm trying to say here is that kind of living through this and seeing that practically every candidate who has a decent chance at becoming mayor of Chicago, a large city, is kind of corrupt or very, very ignorant, and it's very distressing. And so that's one thing I've been absorbed with. The other kind of connected in a way is I've been reading this book by Jason, you mentioned you were a political science major. This book by this guy named John Mearsheimer, who's a political scientist at the University of Chicago, pretty well known. And I think he came out with a book a year ago, kind of talking about how the foreign policy in the United States has been a disaster in the sense of trying to establish, United States hegemony, liberal hegemony over the world, and bringing democracy and freedom to all these places, and it always ends up with a dictatorship or a completely broken country. And you can see that kind of playing out down in Venezuela. So with Donald Trump, he came out with this tweet where, the same old thing. He said, we really need some of that good old global warming. Look what they're getting in Chicago in the Midwest. And I look at that, and Trump is probably, there's a good chance he's actually ignorant, that, he's somebody who is just totally decided to sign on to the climate change denial narrative put out by like the Heartland Institute people here in Chicago and others, that, yeah, there's really nothing to worry about. And he believes that everything he's doing is not actually extraordinarily harmful in terms of climate. And so, again, just I'll summarize this with saying what's in my mind is the fact that we have somebody like Donald Trump being able to make a comment like that at this point in time, and, you know, not to have any fight, not any pushback, not anybody else who has a platform to come up, other than Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to some degree, you know, to actually step up there and say, this is complete BS. And Trump, you know, and you wonder about it because, and this is the, you know, they attack Trump over everything. You know, as I put in some, you know, they attack his appearance. They attack his ability to use language. He can't read. He's a racist. He's this. He's that. You know, they attack everything under the sun, except they don't ever come up and attack him when he's doing something like, let's get ready to invade Venezuela, or let's get ready to bomb over in Syria. Then suddenly he becomes, you know, like he's this hero. He's finally come to his senses. And here with climate change, I don't see anybody stepping up and in response to this tweet and saying, you know what, this guy is either completely ignorant, brainwashed, whatever, and this is something we can't allow to continue. And I just note the absence. Anyway, I've gone on for a long time, but I decided to just update you guys on you know, kind of my consciousness of late.
Very good. Thank you, Dan. Thanks for that update. All right. Next update, when you're ready, is Jason. Take it away, Jason. And Jason is looking a little. Oh, yeah.
Hey.
Yeah.
This is Jason. Sorry, my phone must be. Took it a second for it to, like, do anything. Hello, everybody. You know, it's good to be back on the call. In my own personal life, I won't necessarily go into that, but I think on like a world view, you know, people have heard the news about Australia setting like, you know, I think 4 days, they set the top 4 records for the hottest days in the last like week or something like that. You know, we've had a weather extremes. We got this polar vortex that's happening. And of course that leads people to believe like, oh, the whole climate change thing is fake. But I do see on a trend that people are like slowly sort of waking up, you know, whether it'll do us any good, I don't know. I think that, you know, as Dan was talking about our political, just in this country alone, but probably other countries, even if you look at Davos just happened and like, it doesn't seem like anybody really can pull themselves together. And so, I mean, it doesn't look good on any fronts, but I'm happy to be part of a group that maybe can at least talk about these issues. And even if it only just makes ourselves feel better about it, maybe that's a positive thing. But I do hope that maybe when we can get, you know, Radical Collective Intelligence up and running, that, you know, I would love and be happy to talk about it and try to get people on using it and, you know, engage people. But currently in my life, I feel like I have stopped trying to engage people and convince people that it's a crisis. And Victoria had mentioned something before the call started just about how she had mentioned it to somebody in their 30s, and it can lead to like deep depression. And so I've just sort of, I guess in a way, I've just sort of stepped back and tried to not bombard people with information and smart ass comments about the end of the world. and just come to terms with it myself. But I still, am very passionate about being part of a group like this that is committed to, doing something about this problem. Just because, in everyday interactions with people, you don't get a lot of people willing to talk about these issues, let alone who want to do something about them. And so, yeah, I guess that's all I have to say as a personal update. And it's good to be on the call with you guys and see all you.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason. All right. Next up is Miles, followed by Victoria, and then I'll provide a brief update, and then we'll go into the other agenda items. Take it away, Miles.
Okay. Hi, everybody. And today I'm calling in from the central branch of the Calgary Public Library. A beautiful couple $100 million facility that was built before the crash of oil prices. And it's a spectacular resource, and I'm not sure how much you can see out the window, but through there you can see the Rocky Mountains in the distance, and downtown core is right across the street. So the past week I've had some interesting interactions with people. One was with the president or the CEO of Calgary Public Library. I was reluctant, but I all of a sudden decided, no, I better go to this luncheon, even though it's a fairly pricey luncheon. It's very well done. But anyway, I knew I would have an opportunity to ask him a question. One of the questions that I asked was, first of all, how is it that people, how is it that people can talk to one another without, just good old face-to-face communication, as opposed to relying on social media. Excuse me, I got a mic. We got dry air here. Anyway, so one of the things was I told him how I came down here to talk to people about climate change. Not sure if this will come through very well, but there's a picture of my setup that I had briefly where the sign, there's a sign there, fairly large, few feet by 3 feet. It says, "We are climate leaders, so are you. Whoever you are, wherever you are, we need you now." And those are the words of Greta Thunberg, the Swedish environmental activist. And I have some signs and books, or not signs, but other books, and a couple of props, globe with some saran wrap on it to represent the thickness of the atmosphere. Anyway, I had it up for about 20 minutes, and then somebody came along and said, "You can't have that." So I had to take it down. So I said, "Well, how are you supposed to talk to people face to face?" He apologized. The president apologized, and he was very good about it. He said, "They're working on it." So I said, "Yeah, we should have some conversation pits or something." So that was one interaction, and then that was actually at the Canadian Club of Calgary, and I pulled out my performance art piece, if you remember from last time, the anti-nuclear football with the flashing blue and red lights, and said, I'm asking this question on behalf of mosquitoes and houseflies because, where are they? Mosquitoes and houseflies. I thought, who would have ever thought we'd be worried about them? But indeed, on reflection, I was like, where the hell are they? Like, I can't even remember one mosquito bite this year. So, yeah, it doesn't get any better, that's for sure. But what are you going to do, other than keep at it? I think that's when it comes to mental health for me, I feel better, talking about it and raising the questions, doing it as tactfully as possible. I think, you do have to consider, well, do we have to preface things with a trigger warning? Because I'm going to be upsetting these people who paid $70 for their fancy lunch, and maybe it isn't fair to be talking nuclear weapons and extinction and ecological emergency. And so anyway, I actually said, if you're bothered by these questions, let me know. But we do have to take every opportunity we can to give direction to the so-called authorities and let them know that we are the directors of our society. And I think this is one of the mindsets that we're in. I had a bit of discussion and difference of opinion with Stuart Scott. I said, I don't agree with engaging in civil disobedience, because to me, that is falling into the hands of the prison, surveillance, police, military, pharmaceutical, industrial complex. Yeah, panicking people is good for GDP, unfortunately. So I'd say let's not resort to civil disobedience. Let's take the high road. Let's show that we are the ones that are actually holding to the high road and the high values. And it's these people that are trashing the planet that are the ones that are civil disobedient. So with that, anyway, great to be here.
Thank you, Miles. All righty, Victoria, so great to see you. We're all excited to hear any and all updates you'd like to share. So please take your time. All right, Victoria.
Thanks, Jamin. Well, it's wonderful to be here. I tell you, Jason, I feel kind of like you. It's like, it is so refreshing to be a part of this group, and I'm here anytime I can be to, if nothing else, be able to speak about this. I mentioned this a little earlier. I don't want to get into a lot of detail, but I did share this information with a very bright 30-something in corporate world. And as I've said here too, it's very humbling having taught communication in higher ed and been in network sales, but to figure out how to present this to anyone, because as you just mentioned, what's that fine line? And I know, Jamin, you and I have spoken of that so often. So I continue to struggle with it and would love any, it's like, if we all don't know and do something, it's going to be too late. So you have to know this, where does that right? I struggle with that, yet I want to do something. And I think, Dan, you mentioned something that Trump must just be ignorant. He must not know. But remember, the president of Finland had a good meeting with him, and we kind of know what was said there. So I think that he just doesn't believe anyone but those people telling him we can't let go of the dollars to do anything. And I also did some research this week, and I was shocked at all the new educational videos out there about, see, it is a hoax, look at the cold weather. And what do you do but shake your head again at ignorance? Because how can you, I mean, there are a lot of people, and I've heard it this last week, they're like, see, there's really nothing to worry about, Victoria. Look how cold it is in Chicago. So with that, I'll mute out. Thanks, guys.
All righty. Thank you, Victoria. Jamie, if you want to do an update now, that's great. Or you can kick off the very first agenda item on the update on the Catholic Church. So just unmute and jump in when. Yeah, go ahead, Jamie. Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you great, Jamie. Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Yeah. I don't like to talk too much about the government, only because I worked for the government and I see them as a pretty big obstacle to this. Miles, you hit a pretty important point that, taking action will just draw fire. I worked for Department of Justice. I was inside the agency for a long time, and they're looking for the problems. And if we become a problem with direct destructive social activism. They'll just pluck you from society one by one. It's easy to find a loud target, so that's not the best way to go, which is why we've tried to go through the church. We're struggling with that. And Victoria, you said something interesting that made me think about the president. My president here, I'm in the United States, and Donald Trump's problem isn't ignorance, in my view. Donald Trump's problem is he believes no matter what room he's in, he's convinced he's the smartest person in it. He doesn't bump into people and walk away and say, "Oh my gosh, Melania, I met this superstar today." He talks that way. He's scripted, but he believes no matter what room he's in, he's always the smartest guy. And that got him, that did well for him in his business world, but that's not the way you run a country. You're supposed to fill your cabinet with everyone that's smarter than you. So I'm not looking for the United States government to act on this climate problem, at least to protect the masses. They might find a way to protect themselves, and they probably have military vessels set up to do such things, hospitals and places where the leaders can go live. We can't worry about that. We need, every one of us, and I feel the same way Jason and everybody has said about, it's so difficult to talk to people right in the face of obvious, disasters happening. I mean, like, it's ridiculous. And they're just blasé to it. And, I don't know if it's the Xbox generation or people are just so used to blowing stuff up on their Game Boys that they don't see the slow burn of the frog in the pot of boiling water here that we are as a problem. I'm not sure what the answer is. I do think we each need to burrow into this problem like ticks and keep finding the people that agree with us and keep amassing those people and joining those ranks. I think that this year, 2019, is going to be a tipping point and a lot of things climatologically. And I think that a lot of people are starting to wake up to this. So we need to, in our own communities, whatever way possible, really try to find the gold nuggets. Like I talked about earlier before we started recording, we had a meeting with the Office of Life in the Cleveland Catholic Diocese, part of Catholic Charities wing of the church. And they brought their social action network people. This was the agenda. This is under their scope of duties. Life on Earth and the Laudato Si are a part of what they're supposed to be doing. So we were at the heart of the church in one diocese. And even that meeting ended up with one part of the meeting. There were 3 people there representing 2 sections of the church: the Office of Life, Section A, and the Office of Social Action, Section B. And the Section B office, the second folks, were polite, wonderful. It was a great conversation. And they asked us to kind of go on about our business in a really polite email, that we're not the right place for them. The other Office of Life gave us an opposite email, exactly opposite. This is a wonderful conversation. I don't agree with their view. I'm incredibly excited to keep talking about this, which was really heartening, because then we know this woman who works in the Office of Life in Cleveland can get us in touch with other people that feel her way, because all of her friends feel how she feels, or probably most of them. So we were successful in getting that to happen. But I do want to say it is obvious that the bulk of the people on this planet aren't equipped or willing to try to solve this. And they're looking for other people to do it. And I'm here to tell you, as a retired federal agent, the federal government will show up when the house is burnt down and then find a way to build it. They're not going to show up while it's on fire. So that's all I have to say about that. It is depressing, but I love coming here and talking with you guys. I love knowing that you're out in your communities all across the globe doing what you're doing, and that we are the little cutter ants that are each one taking a tiny piece of the leaf and taking it back to the next, one tiny piece of the leaf at a time. And each cutter ant doesn't worry about the whole plant. They just worry about their leaf. Let me get my leaf back to the plant. And that's what we're doing. I'll go on mute.
Great stuff, Jamie. Thank you. All right, I'll provide a little update, and then we can jump into the agenda items. So just got back to the state of Washington. Good to be back. Was gone for almost a month. Most of the time I was in Ohio with Jamie, and we were working together on lobbying the Catholic Church. And then the last few days was in Melissa and I were in the San Francisco Bay Area, where we hosted a Sierra Club dinner in Berkeley last Thursday on the topic of arcologies, given by Michael Gosney. And then a couple days later, went to an event put on by Extinction Rebellion, this group out of England that had meetings in Oakland and San Francisco. They're having them across the country, and met some really good people there. So I'm actually, optimistic about putting together more and more groups that can work on different facets of this. And we'll get into some of those details when we get into those agenda items. But overall, it's I feel like I kind of vacillate between like charging forward and we're gonna put out this communication, have these meetings, and get something to happen on a planetary scale, and then whether it's a disappointment or just seeing the extreme weather that's going on, and the lack of response, the lack of organized response. I kind of, feel like I'm living in some weird nightmare or something. But, just keep pushing forward. And Melissa, feel free to join us. We're just wrapping up personal updates, and then we'll jump in to an update on the whole Catholic outreach and strategy. Did you want to give an update, sweetie? Or you can when you join. That's fine. Whenever you're ready. So why don't we now transition to? Oh, you want to
just come say hi?
Yeah.
I'm gonna go.
Yeah. Have a seat, sweetie.
Hi guys, I've been missing you. It's Mother Goddess of Love here. No, just kidding. Yeah, we had an awesome trip and made lots of great connections. Love Ohio and San Francisco. Lots of potential for doing all kinds of work with youth and getting involved in some art activism projects in both San Francisco and Cleveland. So that's really exciting. And with the Jesuits, etc. So yeah, it's good to be back on with the island. We're going to launch a big Save the Orca project here. So I'm really excited about that. So that's all I'll say for now. But I'm really glad to see all of you.
All righty. Thank you, sweetie. All right. Well, why don't we jump in next? The first. Want to welcome Adam and if you want to mute your microphone while you're not talking, because we're getting some here. All right. Welcome, Adam. So the let's on the Catholic Church, Jamie, do you want to jump in and kind of build off the update that we haven't really given a more thorough update. Feel free to jump in on that, Jamie, and lead on that. But yeah, as Jamie had mentioned, we did have some good meetings, and a very kind of diverse response from different groups within the Catholic Church. The Jesuits, so far, who we've talked to, seem the most engaged by far, and but there does not seem to be a general kind of acceptance of the conclusions of the Laudato Si and the urgency for taking action. It seems that the Catholic Church, like most other institutions around the world, are in some stage of denial around all this and belief that we can just, forge ahead with business as usual. So we are, we've been putting a lot of work into our written collateral that basically summarize our proposal. And our proposal in a nutshell is we need the world's leaders led hopefully by Pope Francis. We'd love to see Pope Francis, rally together the world's religious and spiritual leaders of all different faiths and disciplines to, put out the call to all their people. See, one of the things that's missing here is there has not been a general call to all of humanity put out by a leadership group that says, this is a code red emergency, everyone, and we all need to get together and do. And of course, that's where a plan needs to be proposed for what all of us, humanity, can do about this. We have a proposal that we've submitted to the Catholic Church, which basically says that when the leaders put out the call for action, that we come together and form a planetary collective intelligence. That's what we're proposing, because it seems kind of the obvious meta solution, that which will generate all the specific solutions that we need to cool the planet, to heal Mother Earth, to heal ecosystems and life support systems. So that's just my high-level overview on our work with the Catholic Church. Jamie, please jump in whenever you're ready. Love to hear more from you on that. And then looks like we've got Miles and Dan and Victoria asking for if we could get. Yeah, go ahead, Jamie. But Victoria is asking if we could give more on their pushback. Do they not believe in the research, or they don't want to look at it, or what is it? So go ahead, Jamie.
Well, Victoria, the pushback comes on two fronts. The pushback we've received, and the pushback specifically from the Catholics, is what I'm talking about. It's not that they don't believe it. They actually sidestep that. When we ask them the question deliberately, they don't give you an answer. They tell you that their focus is to make sure everything they do falls within the Catholic doctrine, which refers to the entire body of whatever's been said, and the entire Holy See agrees. Sort of like they write their own Kool-Aid, they drink their own Kool-Aid. We're having trouble, and this is the very first salvo, we're having trouble getting them to believe that they possess the power that they have to make the change. And when we explain that to them, that they are in a unique position to rally the people in the pews, let's say it's, 1%, that's 12 million people, that would be a movement, and certainly the Pope would pay attention to that. They don't seem to feel comfortable taking what looks like a view of a project that didn't come from within. Did I get that right, Jamie? Didn't you get the impression that they would be much more comfortable if this had bubbled up from inside the church instead of from we brought it to them? I sort of got that impression.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, what we did find that several organizations that we met with, one was a Jesuit retreat house, which is a training center for all the faithful. You could be not Catholic and go to their seminars. They run seminars that are mandatory for the Catholic Church, as well as nuns, women of faith, Jesuits, and all people of the community. So we got a really good reception there, and they're very excited to have us utilize their network to put together a seminar to try to find the people in the pews that we're asking the vicar and the bishop to find. Since they're not doing the work for us, the Jesuits have put on an olive branch saying, you could come here and put on classes and you'll find your people possibly. And then they also gave us a couple other retreat centers that are very activist oriented, very action oriented, and very earth centric. So we are putting together a proposal for a class, seminar, if you will, 2 hours or 4 hours, that we can partner with the Jesuits and bring to the people that are forward thinking inside the church. So that's one phase. The other phase is we've got a pretty good traction with the people that run the Office of Life. That's the office in the Catholic Church that deals with issues such as abortion, transferring organs from persons to persons, euthanasia, the death sentence, the Laudato Si. The Office of Life is the name of the office, and they were quite receptive to working together, and were very, very helpful in giving us some specific names of organizations in the Catholic Church run by women that are said to be very, very deeply involved in this type of thing. It is a good audience for us to go to because they're doing the work, albeit at a micro level. So we are preparing a presentation to go to these organizations and meet with these women and say, look, we're doing some training with the Jesuits to find our people. We'd like to do some training with you. You probably are our people, and to point us in the right direction, because we haven't gotten a no. We've received several no's over the last year. We've not received any no's from the Catholic Church, except for one office in the church said, we're not going to go forward with you, but thanks for the meeting. But the other offices, at the direction of the vicar, we met with the vicar first. That's the number 2 guy to the bishop. The vicar directed us to the Office of Life. We created a meeting with the Office of Life. We went to the Jesuits on our own, and we're getting some traction. We also went to there's a college here in Ohio called John Carroll University. It's a Jesuit school. We also went there, and we found the professor, who's also a vice president level guy, big deal at the university, who agreed to meet with us in mid-February. They're in the process of hiring some board level people, and he's on the interview process. But he agreed that he would meet with us in February, mid-February. He said the 11th, after the 11th. He teaches a specific course at John Carroll University on the Laudato Si. So that is a fantastic keyhole we've got. And in mid-February, we're going to meet with him, go to lunch, and talk about, can we look at his class, his notes, and can we come in and present our proposal to his student body. They're taking this class as an elective. They're paying money for this class. They're interested in it. So can we bring something to the table, even if it's just a half an hour, every other week? Can we be added to the agenda? Can you look at us as just getting into these young minds of the people that are taking the elective course, the Laudato Si, and they're worried about it. And so that might be where we find our motivational people. And with that, I'll yield to Jamin, and I'll mute.
Very good. Thank you, Jamie. Yeah, so, basically our strategy within the Catholic Church is kind of twofold. Number one, working ground up, working from within different organizations and seeing what we can put together in terms of education, in terms of seminar, to really get the tribe together, the tribe within the Catholic Church who is taking this very seriously, has read the Laudato Si and believes that that's, a vision that we should all be following. And of course, we're adding on top of that collective intelligence as the key for generating all the solutions that we need. So, Sweetie, if you want to jump in any time with any comments you have or additional insights about it. But anyway, so that's kind of the bottoms-up approach, and then we're also reaching out directly to Pope Francis. We've got a strategy for that to get our complete proposal into his hands, and ask him to get out there and lead, basically, rally together the other major world leaders, whether Prince Charles, and thank you, Miles, for that excellent reference. We gave a copy of Harmony to the Vicar General, written by Prince Charles, and we've been reading it ourselves. So, there's another example of a world leader who is taking this very seriously. Let's get all those leaders together and put out the call to the entire world. It's time for us to wake up out of our slumber and begin to grapple with this, as we are here on the Social Club.
I would love to add something.
Please.
I want to first of all want to start by mentioning the First Nations people, because I haven't done that yet, and we're back on Whidbey Island, and I'd like to first say Hawa, Thank you to the Coast Salish people and whose land we're on. And I want to acknowledge all First Nations people. I also want to bring in the conversation about the divine feminine, because what's becoming more and more clear is that the need to work within that impulse. And what for me came out of all these meetings and the Sierra Club meeting as well is this new way of working in the world. And oftentimes when we're at these meetings, or people I ran into in Cleveland and San Francisco, including at the Sierra Club talk, one woman came up to me at the Sierra Club talk and said that where was the divine feminine in all this work? And because she was hearing male voices, I think, and the Catholic Church is so patriarchal. So I just wanted to bring that back in. One of the things that's also becoming really, really clear is that the arts, and I believe Pope Francis also mentions this, are going to be essential in this healing program on the planet. And a couple of things that have come up in Cleveland, both through the Jesuits and through, we made a connection, with the Office of Sustainability, which is part of the mayor's office, is creating an art festival and also doing work around healing the planet using art as the vehicle. So these are two things which I find really exciting that are coming up over and over again. So this divine feminine, what does that mean? How do we become part of that? And use that as this way forward, that sensitivity, this idea of nurturing, healing, peace, love, and also using arts as one of the tools for creating this movement within the collective consciousness that's about this healing. And Jamin's colleague and friend Michael Gosney said something to me that I found very, just another way of looking at it, same thing that I'm getting, but just he put it so well. He said that when we are working towards helping the process of evolution, then Mother Gaia, or the universe, will feed us more of this evolutionary process. So what starts happening are synchronicities, blessings, things start manifesting that allow us to become more and more a part of this flow of this natural direction of evolving to these higher states of consciousness. And I find that that's happening all the time now. So I just wanted to bring that in to the conversation. Thank you.
Beautiful, beautiful. All right, and we'll talk more about the trip to the Bay Area and Michael Gosney and the Sierra Club in a little bit when we get to that topic. But first, I want to. We've got Miles and Dan who've been patiently waiting in the queue, so Miles, on to you, followed by Dan. And you're on mute, Miles.
There we go. Thank you. Sorry. So thank you, Melissa, for reminding us to acknowledge First Nations. And I'm on Treaty 7 territory in Alberta, Canada. That is the traditional land of the Blackfoot Confederacy and the Blood, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, Wesley, Stoney Nakoda, and also Métis Region 3. In the background, you can see a teepee because I'm at the Calgary Public Library. And, to further emphasize the point about our staying on the high road, that we are the civil obedient ones, I think is a very powerful position to take. So, I have a Canadian flag with me here on my table here in the library. I have a copy of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And the reason for that is because, again, I want to have all of the reinforcement that I can possibly have to establish that our position is the right position, that we are the directors of these nations. So, you know, it's something I would encourage you to consider as well. You know, and you say, well, I'm here defending the nation, to preserve the nation. And to preserve the nation, we have to preserve the ecology. With respect to First Nations here, I'll show you this. I think I might have shown this before, but I carry this around with me often. It is the scrapbook cover of mine from 1967. It's got my childish art inside. But the reason I have this is, if you look, maybe you can't see it very well, but there's all sorts of images of so-called progress. And in particular, the guy chopping down the tree, I think, epitomizes the cannibal giant that the Indigenous people talk about. You know, it's all well and good to go stampeding across the Turtle Island and taking it over, but we've we neglected to see the great wisdom of the First Nations with respect to walking softly. So I'm going actually this evening to a course given by Native elders of Treaty 7. And last week I learned that they moved their teepee every 3 days, because if you leave the teepee in the same spot for 4 days, the grass will not spring back up. So that's just, you know, one little example of a long list of ecologically minded rules or natural laws that they lived by. I actually hope to meet with an Indigenous elder, and I have a little gift of tobacco here, which is part of the ceremony of engaging with an Indigenous elder. Now, to wrap up, you know, everything that you're doing there with regards to Laudato Si and reaching out to every possible Catholic church and Laudato Si association, and maybe instigating Laudato Si clubs at every church and diocese. Why do I say that? Because I happened to be up at the University of Calgary, and I encountered that they had a little, at their student union building, they had all the students had their different clubs and associations with little kiosks and information booths to promote their club or association to the other students. And I wandered around, there's dozens of them. And so many of them, when we stopped to think about it, we could have an outreach to them to say, oh, that's great what you're doing, and consider this as well. So, for example, I stopped at the sociology club booth and I chatted with the young fellow there, and it reminded me that 40 years ago I went to the University of Calgary, and it's quite a bit different now, but more buildings and such. But I was thinking, these young people, we owe them so much. And I even tweeted that part of a reconciliation between the generations needs to be free education. Like, higher education should be free to students as part of a reconciliation, because we need to have them equipped and trained to do all that they can to, whatever we might do to mitigate the circumstances. It's a slap in the face to expect the youth today to have to go into debt to get educated, to solve for the trashing of the planet that they really had no contribution to. So anyway, you know, radical collective intelligence being the vehicle by which all these clubs and associations could talk together, the Dato C associations or clubs, sociology clubs. There's a group called Climate Hub Calgary. I just joined them. It's a okay, I'm at 6. Thank you. So I'm going to wrap up. But Climate Hub, I don't know if that's a hashtag that's widely known in North America, but anyway, if we can get radical collective intelligence happening, that'd be great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Miles. So up next are Dan and Dan, followed by Victoria. I just wanted to comment, if you, whoever you are, would like to speak, all you have to do is type your name into the chat window. And if you have trouble doing that, just raise your hand or just cut in when we're transitioning in between speakers. So please feel free to insert yourself however you can. Next up is Dan, followed by Victoria. Take it away, Dan. And by the way, we try to keep it at 5 minutes. I give a 4-minute flag and then a 5-minute flag, and then, you know, we don't have a hard ceiling. But anyway, we try to keep it at 5 minutes per speech. So take it away, Dan. Thanks.
Okay. So here are some thoughts that I've been kind of having as this conversation has progressed. What, you know, when you look at the Catholic Church, and again, I really have appreciated the effort, Jamin and Jamie, that you've put out there to try to go this way, because it's very rational, and again, you know, you got to take the shot, and maybe something will develop, maybe not, but you know, the thing is, the Catholic Church, like so many other organizations, it's bureaucratic, authoritarian. And when you have these bureaucratic, authoritarian structures, they tend to become corrupted. In other words, you know, everything becomes about what's the best way we can keep our organization viable, and those of us who are part of it, our careers, our, you know, our lives. And I, of course, you know, working for the city of Chicago, I had to learn that lesson, you know, sometimes really the hard way. So if you think about the fact that if people can't be exposed to a debate concerning abrupt climate change, what are the arguments that support a good probability that we are now experiencing an exponential process which will lead to extinction at a certain point in time? And before it gets to extinction, it would be very dystopian. You know, it's not going to be an easy road. So we don't have the debate. We do not have the education of the population that's really necessary. And, you know, if you're just a person who's not immersed themselves in these issues, you're going to kind of say, well, what's the option? Do I want to believe, you know, kind of the Guy McPherson narrative that the end is coming very quickly? Or do I want to believe that that isn't going to happen? That's not going to happen. You know, clearly the average person wants to say, no, that's not going to happen. And that's the belief they're going to sign on to, as opposed to the other one. So, you know, many times, you know, I bring up the nature of beliefs, and just to bring it up again in this context, you know, the two ways that people form beliefs are, or probably the most general way is, you know, when you are either a child or you're ignorant about something, you listen to an expert. Maybe you read something by an expert, which is a better way of kind of looking at something. But you form a belief. We're programmed to believe, like when we're children, the authority figures in our community, parents, teachers, etc. And when we're adults and we are ignorant about various topics, we will listen to the parental authority figures. So we have a situation where if you have a belief, let's take Donald Trump, the ongoing icon that takes up so much energy. So if I say Donald Trump does not believe that we are in any remote danger from climate change, that's his. Let's just say he's got that belief. He's signed on to it. He got educated in it from somebody, from the climate denial community, from somebody from the energy supported think tanks, etc. So he has that belief. Well, what does that mean? He won't let that belief go. All he will do when he's confronted with information that goes against his belief that we have nothing to worry about, he will rationalize it away by saying, well, that's just okay. He'll say, that's what this expert over here says. But we got another expert over here who's saying something different. I'm not going to believe this one because I don't like the implications. And in other words, when you have a belief and you are confronted with evidence that contravenes, goes against the belief, you will either minimize it or rationalize it away. And the only way you can get rid of a belief that you may have, if you think that it might be good to do so, you have to force yourself to look at the evidence that goes against your belief. And you have to understand that, as you look at the evidence, you need to be able to let the belief that is dominating your mind go. In order for that to happen, you have to have the evidence, which means you need education and debate. And we're not able to get it very easily. All right, I just wanted to bring that up, and I'll pass it on now. Thank you.
No, really good stuff, Dan. Up next is Victoria, followed by Miles, followed by Melissa, and followed by Jamin. So take it away, Victoria.
All right. First of all, I'd just like to reiterate my appreciation to you guys for all the work at the Catholic Church, everything you're doing, the inspiration, all of it. Just know it's so appreciated. And as I say, if I can't be here, at least to have my group to talk to each week, it's really difficult because, as I've shared before, having shared this with close friends and family, it is not something any of them want to speak about. For whatever reasons, I don't judge it, it's not my place. So, but it is very enlightening as, can't remember who said that, there's going to be two ways you're going to look at it. Now, I do have a couple of friends that have wanted to look at it, but they don't, they believe it, but it's not something they want to dwell on. And certainly not to get updates on. Just like, well, I guess if I look out and it's happening, to me, I look out and it's happening, but it's perspective, of course. And Melissa, I just wanted to say, I would never thought we would be speaking of this today, but synchronicities are happening so much in my life. And I had a friend call yesterday, I thought, to tell me about all these synchronicities that were happening in her life. So I'm like, third person. And as far as, I think it was Miles speaking of education, being an educator, one of my careers, I definitely would go for the European model of, like my brother, who's an electrician, carpenter, works with his hands, would have wanted to go to college. But at least in Europe, they have the, which way do you want to go? Instead of everybody being pushed. I had some students in my class at University of Oklahoma who knew they wanted to be electricians, but their parents made them go to college. You know, so I think it should be free for those who want to. And just to say that the education part of it. And Dan, thanks so much. It's something that I think we all know about beliefs, but it's sometimes good to be reminded. You always bring that aspect to this get together, and I appreciate that, because if someone won't look at the research, how, you know, what are you going to do? You can't make them. And to reach a critical mass of people to get something to happen, I mean, that's been our proverbial issue, correct? Love some feedback on that thought. But anyway, thanks for everything everyone's doing, and Miles, all you're doing, and Jamie, everybody. Just appreciate you.
Thank you, Victoria. It's so great to hear from you. All right, next up is Miles, followed by Melissa, followed by Jamin, followed by Dan. So take it away, Miles.
Okay, well, yeah. So I talked about, you know, a reconciliation with the new generation, you know, the millennials. I guess I don't know who's after millennials, but the young people that are in colleges and trade schools and universities right now. You know, it just seems reprehensible that they have to pay for an education when we need them. You know, in fact, I think it's Rick Hansen, the climatologist, he's on record of saying, oh, well, you know, you young people, you're going to have to fix this problem for us. Well, yeah, that's really dumping a lot on them, isn't it? Well, if we're going to do that, then they should at least get free education, whether that's trade school, becoming an electrician, or whatever. So one of the things I mentioned as well was there's all these different clubs and associations that these young people are in at their trade schools or at their universities. And, you know, creating Laudato Si clubs, I mentioned that. Perhaps what we could do is use Radish to connect all these people, you know, go out as much as we can and tell them about Radish and encourage them to have a hangout. Then if we could have a motion presented, a motion where everybody did something that actually made a difference. And what comes to mind is something we have here in Alberta is every beverage container that you purchase, even a milk jug, has a deposit on it. So that means that you bag up your bottles and jugs and cans for any beverage, and you take it back to a recycling depot, and you get your money back. Now, you will not find a bottle or a milk jug, even those little drink boxes, anywhere on the street, because somebody bends over and picks it up, because that's 5 cents, that's 10 cents. Wine bottles, beer bottles, same thing. So let's not only get that happening in your community as well, but let's also get every piece of plastic packaging to have such a deposit. Because what you can do, if there's a value put on that to have it returned, there's people that are making plastic planks and very good structural building materials out of these recycled plastics. But if there's not a price to pay for somebody to actually collect that, well, all they've been doing in a lot of cases with recycling is putting it into shipping containers and sending it off to China and Malaysia. Now they're not doing that anymore. They say, we don't want your crap anymore. So that's creating a problem. Anyway, just a thought, just to summarize, if we could get people using Radish come together, if we can even just draw down plastic, that'd be a step forward, right? Carbon dioxide is going to be a lot more difficult to draw down, but you know, it can be done too. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Miles. Up next is Melissa, followed by Jamin, followed by Dan. Take it away, sweetie.
Miles, that's great. Great ideas. I really love what you're saying about the Laudato Si clubs and also about the plastic. When Jamin and I were in San Francisco, we spent the few days we were there actually picking up plastic because there's so much of it and it's really depressing. It's like everywhere. It's on the beach, it's on the streets, it's in all the plants. So we actually grabbed plastic bags as they were blowing by us and just started picking up litter. On Whidbey Island, a group of us are going to actually start sending back to the companies that sell the products their wrappers. So we're going to collect that as a group, and we're going to ship it back to them to make a point. And I think another thing we can do is write to these different companies and start telling them that we're not going to buy their products until they change the form of packaging so that it's not single-use plastic and that it's at least compostable or biodegradable. And the other thing around plastic, Jamin and I, when we were, again, in San Francisco, we saw a fantastic installation, which I will see if you guys can see this on my phone. Let's see. Can you guys see that? It's a blue whale that is made out of plastic that a group of artists collected and cleaned and heated and melted down and repurposed it. And they made this beautiful blue whale. They have signage that talks about single-use plastic and how many tons of it is making its way into the oceans and the waterways every single day. So it was a very powerful installation to see. So that's just quickly on plastic. And then I want to come back to what Dan was saying. So yeah, Dan, really interesting way of looking at these politicians who are running the world at the moment. I do just want to say that these leaders, such as our own president, are symptomatic of the problem. They're not the cause, the root cause. We're all part of the causality of the problems that we're facing. And I think that our president is actually doing a job right now called awakening. he's waking us up to see the rottenness of the way we've been living. And unfortunately, I think, he's doing a really good job of that. I don't like him. I don't like his policies or what he's doing, but I think he is waking people up and forcing us to look at the polarization and all the problems that we've created as humanity and that we need to change. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, sweetie. All right. Next up is Jamin, followed by Dan. So what I wanted to mention is that, and this has been mentioned from different folks here, is that what we really need is open, honest, exploratory debate, dialogue, deliberation, exploration of solutions that we might come up with at multiple different levels. And that, that conversation is eerily absent from the public sphere in the media because there isn't even acknowledgement that we have a crisis. Mm-hmm. Much less an exploration of solutions to it. So it is, layer upon layer of dysfunctionality and delusion, starting with the delusion that there is no problem, right? Or no droids to see here, move along. But we need to get through that however we can. And that's where we're calling on world leaders to help with that. But then get to the real work, which is what we're modeling here on this weekly series, The Social Club at the End of the World, which is exploration of solutions. What can we do, right? Both meta solutions, platform level solutions, as well as very specific solutions, like what Miles and Melissa were talking about reusing, recycling, etc. So on that note, in terms of, getting healthy discussion and debate and collective exploration to happen, I'm going to send out an article that was sent to me a couple of weeks ago by Nafiz Ahmed, a very well-known London journalist and academic, who has written it's more than an article. It takes about an hour to read, really dense stuff about collective intelligence, and about the crucial importance of looking at other perspectives. And he actually has kind of a systematic way of identifying when you yourself, or I myself, am in a box and, you know, are only seeing a limited perspective, whether because of religion or ideology or just the way we were brought up or whatever. But that's going to be absolutely crucial because, you know, here we've got 7.4 billion people with 7.4 billion different perspectives. How do we ever reach agreement on anything, especially things that are going to require radical changes in our lifestyles, in government spending, et cetera, et cetera. And in the next topic segment, when we talk about the Sierra Club dinner that we had and Extinction Rebellion and some of the new groups that are starting to form, we'll get more into that. But I just wanted to highlight, you know, this is where we need to, you know, I just kind of see two major stages. One is the planet waking up and saying, oh my goodness, all right, we really need to deal, not just on a chit chat. That's an interesting news item, you know, now back to the sports wrap, you know, but this is it. This is the big one. And we're, you know, we're on a fast track to extinction if we don't deal with it in a really radical way. So first is waking up and then grappling and co-creating solutions. So we'll delve more into that. That's all I wanted to say at the moment on that. Next up is Dan, followed by Miles. Take it away, Dan.
Okay, so some things to consider, kind of a rehash again, but since we need to refreeze the Arctic, start the drawdown of the greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere using technologies that, if they are scaled up so they could possibly be sufficient, it's all going to cost a lot of money. And finally, and then, you know, moving off of a fossil fuel industrial system. So these are very radical, you know, and I mean, in a way, when I say that, yeah, we got to refreeze the Arctic, better get that done, because if it doesn't happen, you know, there's going to be so much methane and other greenhouse gases involved that it will be too late. You won't even have time to scale anything up. You won't have time to refreeze the Arctic. You know, these are forces which are very, very powerful. And, you know, these are planetary dynamics, which are very, very difficult to alter. So if you think about the things that need to be done, and, you know, so two things, which I've brought up numerous times. One is, here in the United States and any place else in the world where we are living, where you have a neoliberal economics perspective, meaning you're going to have deregulation, remove the regulations on doing anything with the environment and anything else. And you're going to have privatization, weaken the government from even being able to do good. Not that they always do, and a lot of times they really don't, of course. But, you know, let's get rid of the government. Let's deregulate everything so there's no rules, there's no restraints on human behavior, hoarding, greed, etc. And then finally, you know, let's not tax the very wealthy. You know, when Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, you know, came out, well, let's have a 70% marginal tax on income above $10 million a year. And suddenly, you know, it's like, oh my God, what is she talking about? They're going to want to confiscate everything. And some of those politicians who are elected, they didn't even seem to initially quite grasp what a marginal tax rate was, which she noticed very quickly. But you know, the thing is, you have a system in place which nurtures psychopathy. You know, and so when you have in the power structure people who are ignorant and kind of psychopathic on that end of the spectrum, you can't expect to get very much done. And part of the way of keeping things under control is to focus on tribalistic differences. And so, you know, we're talking here about the Native American tribes that at one point in our country, in North America, and, you know, other native Indian tribes down, you know, in Mexico, Central America, South America, all of these native Indian peoples were destroyed by, you know, the conquerors who essentially came from Europe. But today we have a pretty vicious tribalism going on. The Chinese people, the Chinese government is very tribalistic by race, by language, and by culture, and by history. And they have many, many resentments against the other big tribal grouping, the English-speaking, primarily Caucasian, you know, peoples who live in the United States, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and Great Britain. And this is very, very counterproductive to anything getting solved. And that's something which needs to be discussed. And you know, in other words, we have to have cooperation between the Chinese, as they call it, the white supremacist Five Eyes, you know, meaning those countries I just named, including Canada and the United States. And then to bring up something that Jamie said, and then I'll get off of this. You know, Jamie, back when we were talking about, you know, if you make too much noise or you protest too effectively, you know, the intelligence community, in essence, will find a way to have you removed, whether they're in the Justice Department, the FBI, the CIA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, you name it, you know, wherever, in the corporations, in the media, they'll find a way to remove you. But this is again part of the problem, because we can't have change. We cannot have change when everybody has got to live under this kind of a tyranny, and it needs to be talked about, because again, without people actually thinking about this and saying we don't want this anymore, and whether it's the Catholic Church hierarchy or the political people, you have bully pulpits, you know, and you ought to be out there talking about the changes that need to be addressed. Okay, that's it. I'm signing off. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dan. Really good stuff you're bringing up. Okay, next up is Miles, followed by Jamin. But first, let me ask, is there anyone who would like to speak who doesn't have the ability to type your name in? Just raise your hand so we can get you in the queue. All right, or just jump in, you know, again, in between speakers, if you'd like to get into the queue. All right, next up is Miles, followed by Jamin. Take it away, Miles.
Okay, so thanks. Related to this conversation about where's the money going to come from, because, yeah, to even solve plastic, it takes money. To draw down CO2, it's going to take money. So we have to divert, instead of trillions being spent on military weapons and flying around in big bombers and such, We need to turn that into carbon dioxide sequestration. And there's technology. The feedstock for this technology is electricity. So in order to get carbon dioxide out of the air, you have to have electricity to run these plants. Now you need renewable electricity. And I just, the other day or today, I saw in China, they've built this big tower on which at the top of the tower is a focal point where all these big mirrors focus the sunlight to boil water at the top of the tower. And I believe there's one already for some years in Nevada, in the desert, Nevada, that generates electricity. So, you know, there's like, this is, and I saw on a show that you have down in the States there, these guys, they're Mythbusters, you know, Mythbusters. I might have mentioned this before. They showed how by just having a wall, like a wall, you know, pretty much the size of what I have behind me here, covered in mirrors, little mirrors, all focused on one point, you will burn a hole, not only through a laptop, but you can burn a hole through a steel meat cleaver. So there's ways of doing this, creating this renewable electricity to draw down carbon dioxide. Now to wrap up, where's this money going to come from? Well, if you go to my Twitter, you can take a look at this, but there's an item about this gentleman. He's a historian. He goes to Davos. He's a historian. He said to this group at Davos, "It feels like I'm a firefighter or I'm at a firefighters conference and no one is allowed to speak about water." So this historian wasn't afraid to confront the billionaires at Davos about their greed and talk about taxes. How there's nobody. Trump gave a big tax cut to the wealthiest people. So this historian was bold to say, we have to actually tax these crazy, obscene amounts of wealth that people have generated. And I replied to that. I said, to talk taxes, first we have to talk governance. But before we talk governance, we have to talk about men and womb men. Woman comes from womb men, authority roles. So this is the divine feminine that Melissa was talking about. As Chief Hendricks told Benjamin Franklin in 1754, when Benjamin Franklin was drafting your United States Constitution, Chief Hendricks said to Ben, okay, this is all real well and good what you wrote up here, but where are the womb men? You know, so now to summarize, with respect to Carl Jung, he's a bridge. I've learned recently from Skip Conover. Skip Conover, he's a Trevi Fountain. I call him a Trevi Fountain of all things Jung. And I've also just recently reached out to the Native Women's Association of Canada to talk to them about how we move this forward, because that's what's missing. I totally agree with Melissa. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Miles. Next up is Jamin, and no one in the queue after Jamin. So I'm going to shift gears and introduce the next topic. Of course, you know, we bounce around a bit in our comments and whatnot, and that's totally fine. In fact, encouraged. So whatever topic we're on is kind of more just like a guideline or one focus of many. But the next topic I'd like to talk about is what we covered in the San Francisco Bay Area in the last few days, which is we kicked it off with a Sierra Club dinner on the topic of arcologies. And then at Extinction Rebellion kind of took it to a new level. But here's the general topic space. Okay, so for those who don't know, what is an arcology? It's a mashup between architecture and ecology. And the vision, which has been pioneered since, I don't know, probably the 50s and 60s, and Michael Gosney is right in the middle of that. We're having worked with Paolo Soleri and Arco Santi and in Arizona and other intentional communities and transformational arcologies. The basic idea is that we design there's two ways to do it, either from scratch or by transforming existing cities. But we design, for lack of a better word, a utopian city, which is not just utopian from the standpoint of people, but from the standpoint of caring for Mother Earth, caring for the environment. So the big vision is, imagine the entire world is kind of divided up into different sectors. And in the middle of each sector is an arcology, like a city, basically, that is responsible for that whole sector. And that everything that the humans do, who are living and working in this arcology and then, you know, fanning out to different parts of the sector, the different wildlife, ecosystems, rural areas, etc., in the sector, whether land or water or atmosphere for that matter, that everything they do is with a view to healing and restoring and ensuring the ongoing health of the ecosystems and nature within their sector. So with that as a context, Michael Gosney gave a really wonderful presentation on arcologies, their history, background, and just to give people some sense of you know, their own experience with this sort of thing. Most of us have been to San Francisco or spent time there. San Francisco as a big city has a lot in common with this vision of an arcology, in the sense that you have relatively small footprints for human dwellings in San Francisco. You know, most of the homes there don't have their own front yard or backyard or anything like that, or maybe they just have a tiny little garden area in the back. But it's big public spaces that are shared by all, like Golden Gate Park, the Presidio, various parks and coastlines around the city, Ocean Beach, etc. And so the public as a whole gets to enjoy and hopefully care for the nature areas, while the footprint that we occupy as people, you know, really shrinks down to, you know, just a small private place to eat and whatnot. Even gathering places, you know, are public, like where Miles is at the library right now. A great example of an anchor element of an arcology, a public library, public spaces. So now, if you carry that forward to an extreme, a very positive extreme, where the city center, say it's a city of 5,000 or 10,000 people, where everyone can walk to every other place within the city or bicycle, but no need for cars. If you take away the need for cars and you take away the need for like having a big McMansion with a big front yard, backyard, whatever else, boat, your own vehicles, your own whatever, that's what, you know, it's the American dream to acquire and own all this stuff for me, that it drives everyone to get out there and work and produce, raping Mother Earth in the process. So we're in this vicious cycle of this possession trance, as Daniel Pinchbeck puts it. And the arcologies are a way to kind of break out of that trance and say, hey, wait a second, there's something much more beautiful that's possible, which is living together in community, not trying to acquire, produce, and throw away, but, you know, living together in a very holistic way. We can all imagine that kind of utopia. But then, you know, the $100 trillion question is, how do we get there from here, given that there's so much inertia, you know, pulling us, sucking us back into the current way. And so now spilling over to the conversations at Extinction Rebellion, I got up there and made a speech at the Extinction Rebellion event in San Francisco. And then a bunch of people came to me afterwards and started talking, and now we got a little bit of a community forming there, just as we formed a community at the Sierra Club dinner around arcologies. But the grand theme, as I'm proposing it to all of you and to the world, is that as we embark upon this complete holistic redesign effort. Let's design the world as we want to see it. You know, it may remain as a utopian vision that we never achieve, or maybe we figure out creative ways to get there incrementally. But we design the world as we want it to be, including our ecologies, these cities, and all this infrastructure in between, holistic land management, caring for land, ocean, atmosphere, drawdown, et cetera, et cetera. And that of that entire massive design project, what do we take on first? That the first thing we take on is designing the information systems and the collective intelligence systems that will ultimately guide and orchestrate the whole, right? And for a number of reasons, not the least of which being that if we can build this collective intelligence platform first, that'll greatly facilitate the design of everything else within the entire system of our ecologies, the new world that we want to build towards. And, you know, that's sort of what I've been saying all along, but now I see it in a different framing, which is the framing of redesigning the world and humans' impacts and interactions with the world, so that we go from being net destroyers of the world to net healers of the world as a species. But in that redesign, we start first with designing the collective intelligence and participating in it, which of course all of us are doing here on this video conference, but we need to get the world to participate in. But anyway, with that, I just wanted to kick off the topic of our ecology, intentionally redesigning our world, and starting with collective intelligence. Let me see who's in the queue. Currently, no one's in the queue. So I will, I guess, keep talking until somebody queues themselves up, or just interject or interrupt. That's totally fair game at this point. Dan's in the queue, so take it away, Dan. I'll go on mute.
Yeah, so the idea of arcologies, communities designed to adapt to what's going on with Mother Earth, say, that's a great idea. You know, would be perhaps on some levels actually necessary. It's a good idea, you know. But we keep coming back to what are the constraints on, you know, just going to the Arctic, for example, because to me, you've got obvious exponential processes going on in the Arctic. I mean, it's just, it's happening. And yet it's something which is not able to be discussed in a rational way. And so what constrains that discussion? What constrains it is, again, the fact that the power in this world, the corporate powerhouses, some of the military corporate combines, the psychopathy that permeates so much stands in the way of even having a discussion. And so, you know, and so an organization like Extinction Rebellion, which conceptually sounds, you know, that's great. And maybe that'll gain some traction. I do think that the consciousness, again, will be raised. But I do feel that what is necessary has to be discussed and absorbed by people. And eventually people have to say, let's all make the sacrifices that are necessary. Let's repent for the sins that we've all collectively engaged in. And that includes not being able to confront in effective ways, you know, kind of the embodiments of, you know, selfishness, greed, you know, so that manifests in someone like Donald Trump. But Donald Trump is among so many people that are very similar to the way he is. You know, Donald Trump was a psychopath probably from the get-go as a child, given what you read about his history. And so for someone like that coming up in this kind of a culture, hey, it's great. He's going to prosper. And he has, one way or the other. But for those of us who are not, you know, sort of by nature kind of more on the psychopathic end of the spectrum, it gets nurtured and drawn out in this kind of a culture. And so, you know, I just think that we need, you know, here's a fantasy. We could go ahead and all across the country, you know, whether it would be in various Catholic churches, etc., you know, you could basically have trials take place, you know, where you could have, you know, like a jury or something, you know, where actually let's talk about what the, you know, the needs to be done, who is guilty, and have them, you know, come together and render a decision. You know, in other words, as an organized event, let's discuss, you know, things connected with abrupt climate change. Let's discuss things connected with the political psychopathy in the country. And if you don't have some way beyond, you know, every march that I've seen for decades never really seems to amount to very much. You know, people get together, there's sort of, you know, it's good for the people, you feel good. Hey, that's great. You know, we have community here, we're talking and everything, but it never really goes very far. You know, it happens and then it's gone, almost like watching a TV show. And we have had, you know, serious, what I would say, you know, demonstrations which cross the line into a certain level of violence, and then of course they become discredited. But you can see what's going on over in France with the yellow vests, what to some degree is going on in England with the Brexit people, what we have to some degree going on here with the populist deplorables here in the United States, where to some degree they've figured out that the elites do not have their interest at heart, that they are very detrimental to the well-being of these individuals and their families, etc. And that's something which is now unleashed, and it's something which could be built upon because it's the same forces which are holding back anything on climate change. I know I'm going to give it up. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dan. Next up is Miles, followed by Jamin. And of course, anyone who wants to get in the queue, just signal so in any way you can. Typing your name in by default. But anyway, please speak up if you want to get in the queue. Okay. Miles, take it away. Thanks.
Yeah, to talk to that psychopathy that we have in our culture, I believe all we have to do is watch that Fire Festival documentary on Netflix. Wherever you have a pyramid, the people often who will claw their way to the top, stepping on other people to get to the top of any hierarchical structural pyramid organization chart, shall we say, will be often these people who have no compunction. They're soul killers. They don't care about another person's soul. They're in it for themselves. And that's where the indigenous people, their traditional governance structure was to meet in a circle. And the talking stick or the talking feather goes around, and everybody gets a chance to speak. And there's not the opportunity for people to climb the corporate ladder. These corporations are artificial persons that can live for hundreds of years. They're our creation. They're given rights of a person in law. They're given rights of free speech. And they have no soul. They don't care about emotion, love, kindness, compassion. Yeah, the corporations will have their posters on the walls. But at the end of the day, they're there to make money. You know, that's why, as you said last time we talked, you got nowhere with Microsoft. And none of these corporations, as long as they have a fiduciary duty to their shareholders to just keep growing, yeah, we're doomed unless we correct that. Thank you.
Good stuff, Miles. Totally agree. So I want to talk more about kind of this sort of arcology perspective and the intelligence of the arcology network and all that. I want to, here's how I want to talk about it is that, you know, before, like if you were to go back, you know, a year ago to the social club at the end of the world, was essentially beating a drum that said, look, we need to come together as a collective intelligence so that we can solve our problems. But at the root of it was, you know, we've got these major problems to solve. They're really, really bad. So, you know, let's get together and rake through the muck and solve these problems. What my kind of epiphany of the last, you know, couple of weeks now with this whole arcology focus is that by focusing on arcologies, a network of arcologies, and redesigning the world, that's a much more positive conversation than the conversation that the Arctic is melting and the greenhouse gases are, you know, increasing, and we're going down and we're heading towards extinction. And you know, look, we can all agree that it's vital that we build this planetary community to have all these conversations and develop this collective intelligence. Well, at the Sierra Club dinners, which I'm program chair of, so I line up all the speakers for the Sierra Club dinners in the Bay Area, I had put on the docket 5 times speakers and topics related to abrupt climate change and the urgency of all this. And what I found was, you know, at first when I brought Guy McPherson, you know, but a lot of people came out and, you know, we had a big dinner about, you know, abrupt climate change and all that. But then the interest waned and waned and waned to the point that December's dinner literally had to be canceled because we had too few people showing up or signing up to come to the dinner. So with this last dinner, we took a whole different approach, which is a much more positive approach, focusing on our ecologies and where we want to get to. And of course, along the way, solving our problems. I'm increasingly inclined to see, and the response from the community was very dramatic. You know, we had over 60 people come, and you know, so we had a really great group, and after dinner discussion and everything. So it's an unfortunate reality that the world is not coming together to directly grapple with our problems. So this is what I'm proposing through the arcology conversation is a way to achieve the same end. Yes, solve our problems, but through a pathway which feels more positive and has kind of more positive elements to it. So in a way, it's kind of sugarcoating the dog shit, if you'll pardon the expression, but you know, we've got to get the bitter pill down. So, you know, how do we make that palatable? We're a very special group that we've assembled here that week in, week out just comes and stares in the mirror. Humanity staring itself in the mirror and saying, wow, this is a giant mess. We need to solve it. But if we take a bit more of a positive, dare I say, utopian, you know, approach, then I think that can bring in a lot more people. And here's kind of how I see it shaping up. So imagine we get a greater and greater community coming together to talk about what we want, the world we want to create. And then we say, okay, well, you know, what parts of that world might we start with? How might we get started? And, you know, again, just to reiterate what I said a little bit ago, if we start with collective intelligence, that makes the most sense, because then we'll have a much more greater intelligence with which to design every other aspect of it and figure out the transition plan. So speaking of that, imagine we start with building the collective intelligence and growing that. The collective intelligence comes together and says, all right, what will we need to transform in the way of human culture? How do
Just going to interrupt. There's a little kid down there. He's got a stick, you know, one of those grippers that he's picking up garbage.
Awesome.
He puts it into the basket that his mom's got pushing there, the
That's cool.
carriage.
Beautiful, beautiful. See, just by changing the conversation to something more positive, now people in Calgary are picking up garbage. So
Yeah, and on that note, sorry, Jamie,
Yeah,
to interrupt as
yeah.
well. I saw on YouTube someone had caught on a security camera an elephant picking up human litter and putting it into a garbage can.
Wow. Wow, beautiful. You know, and when we were doing it in San Francisco, I kind of got this vibe from the birds,
Yeah.
especially, that they were appreciating what
Yeah.
we were doing.
Yeah, me too.
Anyway, so imagine, so we first form collective intelligence. We direct it at transforming human culture to be much more open and much more, you know, doing what we're doing here and do it publicly so that it can be shared. And then recognizing that that cultural transformation, it's happening right here, right now. We're creating, this is a seed of a new culture for humanity that we're creating here by coming together regularly and manifesting this collective intelligence. Now, with this cultural transformation and the increase in intelligence that we're experiencing, we will be able to come up with so many different solutions. Victoria is an expert in media solutions, speeches, videos, advertisements, campaigns that can draw more and more people in.
Art.
And art, thank you. And so as these, as we continue to come together with a focus on intelligence and with a focus on transforming culture, that becomes a really powerful platform for then taking on our problems, bringing more people in. It becomes this whole positive movement with self-reinforcing feedback, causing it to grow and evolve. And as this movement builds, then we'll be ready to finally refreeze the Arctic. Now, all of this can happen very, very quickly. It doesn't have to take years or months. It can happen in weeks, but we've got to get the right kind of beginning crystal started, and so that it can really grow organically and exponentially from there. So that's what I wanted to say next. Let's see who's in the queue. We got Dan next in the queue and nobody after Dan, so feel free to put yourself in the queue or get my attention and I'll put you in the queue. So take it away, Dan.
Yeah, so you know, and you guys have heard this from me all the way back to the beginning of Social Club. You know, I understand the desire, maybe the need to approach things in a positive way. Let's solve this. Let's all come together. Let's, etc. My understanding of human nature, though, tells me that in a situation like this, where even though, yes, things could, you know, maybe if Miami and New York City get flooded this summer completely, suddenly things will start to come together. Maybe so. But the reality is, unless people really believe that this is a life-threatening situation in the near future, they generally are not going to act. How much energy do we have? You know, it's finite. It's all finite. And if it all go, you know, it's like if it's all about what is Donald Trump doing or not doing, that's just wasted energy in my mind. If it's, you know, I like, you know, I like sports, but I don't want to waste a lot of time following spectator sports. It's just, you know, it drains away a lot of energy. But here's the thing, and again, I'll just give a little anecdote. You know, when Mayor Emanuel was running to be elected the last time, and he was probably going to get defeated by a woman named Karen Lewis, who was the president of the Chicago Teachers Union. And I worked very hard for Karen Lewis. You know, I was out on the street just doing whatever I could. But, you know, she came down with a brain cancer, had to drop out of the contest. And a guy named Jesus Chuy Garcia stepped in. He was recently elected to Congress. And so, you know, I didn't quite have the feel for Chuy the way I did for Karen Lewis, but I went ahead and I worked a little bit for Chuy. Anyway, I went to one of his offices, and I had an article that was talking about Mayor Emanuel and how Mayor Emanuel had threatened to have this state representative, I think he was a state representative, to have his house burned down if he didn't vote the way that Emanuel wanted concerning the pensions. In other words, Emanuel was pretty much speaking like the gangster that he fundamentally identifies as himself as, really. You know, just very aggressive, very, you know, domineering, and if you don't do what we tell you to do, you know, we'll have a way of removing you one way or the other. So I brought this in to Chuy's office. And the woman who was running the office, she told me, oh, no, we don't want to use this. No, because we're trying to run a positive campaign. Well, what happened was there was this debate between Chuy and Rahm Emanuel on our Channel 11, you know, public access or, you know, network, which is now pretty much at the beck and call of corporate money. But so they had this debate, and the guy who was running the debate, this guy Phil Ponce, he goes ahead and he brings up, he asked Chuy, he said, well, is it a problem for you that one of your sons was in a street gang? And that caught, you know, and it caught him by surprise. And of course, Emanuel was sitting there, and of course, he didn't say anything, but earlier, before the debate, he had already said numerous times, no, we don't want to bring anybody's family into this. That would be dirty politics to bring up somebody's family. But he sat there and didn't really say anything, and Chuy was embarrassed, and he wasn't really ready for it. And what he should have been ready for was, okay, well, let me remind you, Mayor, of what you said to Greg Harris, threatened to have his house burned down. Is that, you know, talk about being a gangster. And he could have said more about Emanuel. So, yeah. And so anyway, so Chuy lost, and you know, we had, there was a birthday party for the alderwoman out in the 10th Ward, far southeast side of the city. And it was, you know, an event. A lot of people were coming. Chuy was there. After a period of time, you know, I went up to him and I said, you know, Chuy, want to let you know that I went to this office, etc. And you know, he said to me, you know, he said, well, I wish I had known that. You know, in other words, his office probably didn't even pass it on. It was killed off. What I'm trying to say is that this, you know, this necessity to be positive. when in reality we're in a psychopathic culture where positivity, if it gets in the way of profits and personal interests, is not going to go anywhere. And I think, and this is the last thing, and I'll get off, is this. I'll go back to it. If you have to realize, because of education and debate, that we're in an exponential process, and we may be, according to Guy McPherson, it's already passed. There is nothing that could be done at all. But the premise of the social club has always been, let's be positive. Let's go down fighting. Let's take whatever action we can. It's the right thing to do. And I just would say that part of what I think, is the right thing to do is to get people aware that if you don't exert the socio-political pressure on these psychopathic politicians and others in the leadership of this country and in some other places, you're done. It's just kind of like there's no hope of really getting anything done. You have to attack the people who are basically have no interest in change. And in order to muster up the courage, the heart, the strength to actually take it to people, you have to be able to tell them, just like somebody who gets, as McPherson would, if you've got a terminal disease, maybe you ought to hear about the fact that that's what you've got. Maybe something could save you, but you need to know where you're at this point in time and to make decisions and why you still can. I'm all for positivity, but I don't think that positivity should become a diversion or a drain on energy. And I know, Jamin, I'll say this to you, particularly this last effort that you and Jamie did with the Catholic Church, it was really a beautiful thing, and it's still ongoing, and all of that. But and look, you've made many efforts in different ways, and but I just we're dealing with a mentality where again it's a culture of psychopathy. These people need to be confronted. All of us need to be confronted in a sense about what we've done, where we're going, etc. So anyway, with that discordant note, I'm signing out here.
Thank you, Dan. All right. Up next in the queue is Melissa, followed by Jamin. Dan, we're getting some echo. Run a mute. That'd be great. And if there's anyone else who wants to be in the queue, just signal, let me know now or as soon as you can. Take it away, Melissa. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. I do want to remind us that although we think we control everything, that there is a greater force that actually is driving the ship. And personally, I see this as an opportunity for evolution. I don't actually like that word, but I'm going to use it anyway. And I think there are going to be many responses. I think each one of us have to use the gifts that we've been given in this lifetime, and we get to have choice in whether we want to approach this from a positive angle or from a realistic negative angle. My own personal experience has been that the more passionate and more positive that I am, even though I'm looking at reality and what is really going on, is way more effective than not being that way. We witnessed that, Jamie, Jamin, and myself, when we were in the various meetings with both the Catholic Diocese and the woman from the Jesuit Center, that as soon as this more feminine, co-creative, positive, passionate impulse was there, that we got more positive responses and a willingness to become involved and engaged. So I just wanted to remind us of that. And that doesn't mean that, we aren't facing serious problems. I also personally believe that as things get hotter and hotter, and we saw that again in California, that thanks to the forest fires, there's been more and more engagement with local organizations and individuals in learning about regenerative land management, taking care of the water. They're actually actively setting up programs in California, in the Bay Area, that address these issues. So it's kind of a cause-effect thing, which is leading to a positive outcome. Now, whether that saves life on Earth, you know, who knows? But we do have this opportunity to work with the divine feminine, Mother Gaia, and the universal forces to evolve and to reach a higher state of, well, I'll call it consciousness in the process. So I'm going to sign out here.
Beautiful. All right. Next up is in the queue is Jamin. I don't think anyone else is in the queue after me. So I want to talk about the, you know, the positive versus you know, negative, or positive versus realistic reality. Really good points made, Dan, Melissa. And here's what I would say about that. So first of all, building on what you just said, sweetie, the fact that things are continuing to heat up and will continue to heat up, people, I think that's the best way of getting people to recognize and see what, you know, what's going on, and that this is real. So then as you get people's attention, then the question is, you know, what are their options for what they can do about it? And if they see that there's a positive group that's aiming to transform everything and really create a utopia on Earth, that a paradise on Earth, thank you, that I believe is going to be much more attractive for people to join than, you know, we screwed up and now we need to fix it so we can, you know, constantly tread water to try to get back to some sort of, to try to get back to what? The same economy, the same kind of economy that's caused these problems in the first place. I'm not trying to make a straw man out of anyone who's disagreeing with me, but I'm just saying, I think the positive approach, as people voting with their feet, coming or not coming to Sierra Club dinners in the Bay Area, have shown a positive approach has a lot more draw. Now, once you get people together in this positive, you know, framework, there, I think it's very easy to build in, look, we need to cool the planet. We need to refreeze the Arctic. We need to do geoshading. We need to sequester carbon. We need to do all these things. But simply putting it in a positive framework, in a positive context, right? I think that context is decisive. Another thing is, you know, Dan, I'm glad you brought up the examples of, you know, Emmanuel versus Chuy Garcia, and, you know, whether we bring out negative things or not. I think you know, it's true, you know, the vast majority of the American population is kind of focused on what's on the news and this Trump stuff and all this negative stuff. What the point I want to make is, I think that we will, our movement, our mission here will be well served by, instead of trying to target the majority of people and trying to recruit from them, I'm much more of the mindset recently that we put out a dog whistle to those people who, maybe the 1% of the population who is dialed in, who are, you know, have a mentality similar to ours, and who, if they knew about our community, would want to join, right? You know, for example, within the Catholic Church, our epiphany about that applied there is, hey, instead of trying to go after all Catholics, let's focus on the Jesuits, who we think would be much more susceptible and receptive to our message and what we're proposing. Pope Francis is a Jesuit. Kind of a more, you know, for lack of a better word, hardcore, faction within the Catholic Church. And the women, the nuns, the women of religion within the Catholic Church, another group that I think would be much more, in general, predisposed, open to this message. But when we look at the global population, progressive people like us, right, our tribe, let's find our micro tribe and attract them. I think once we do that, we can come up with all the different solutions, cultural, media, communication, etc., that will ultimately bring in the vast majority of humanity. But I think we start with our micro tribe of progressives, intellectuals, folks who are predisposed to this message, get a critical mass of us, and then that can be the trim tab that moves the rudder, that moves the aircraft carrier.
I just want to, if I may,
please, yeah.
The other thing that came up at the Sierra Club, and Damon, I'm glad you mentioned what you did, because it kind of sparked in my memory this, that there are many groups doing really great work on the planet, but we're all very disparate. We don't know of each other's existence, and or if, for example, a lot of nonprofits do know about one another, but they are kind of competitive because they see themselves as not so much adversaries, but competing for the same pot of financing to help sustain them. So I think some of the work is going to be identifying these groups or individuals who are doing really great work on the planet, and kind of finding a way to bring us together as a collective. That's one thing. I also believe that most people are good, and that they don't know how they can contribute. So a lot of, there's been a lot of conversation around, talking or having programs, workshops, etc., where we're talking about the problems we face and finding solutions, but also being able to give people something to take away with them, which is an action plan. What can they do as individuals to participate to make a difference? So I wanted to add that in. Thank you.
Beautiful. All right. Next up in the queue is Dan, and no one after Dan at the moment. So take it away, Dan.
Okay, so just a couple of thoughts in addition to what I've already said. If you look at where people get engaged in the United States, particularly, it's over elections, where you have everybody kind of listening to the candidates and what they're saying. When we had Donald Trump running against Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, regardless of, maybe the popular vote was a few million more for Hillary than Donald Trump, etc. Donald Trump had two messages. One was to the dispossessed working class in this country, the elites outsourced your jobs, and now you're suffering as a result of it. I'm going to solve that problem from you. I'm going to bring the jobs back, the manufacturing, industrial jobs back. That was one message he had. The second one was, what's the point of having all these foreign wars and all of this money being spent, bombing and then rebuilding Iraq, etc., this kind of thing? Why can't we do something about our crumbling infrastructure here in the United States? So, in a sense, Donald Trump had a certain kind of negative message to deliver. You've been screwed, you've been betrayed. And what's the point of destroying other countries and rebuilding them when we're letting our infrastructure, our country, go down the tubes? So, you combine a certain kind of negative with a positive. People in this country do not understand how they are suffering, or they will be suffering, from decisions that Donald Trump is making right now concerning climate change. And so you had Hillary Clinton running on what I would say more of a, kind of pseudo-positive kind of messaging. Let's all come together regardless of race, religion. We're all one, people. She even made a comment at one point, I can imagine not having any borders, in other words, South America, Central America, and North America being some version of Europe, the European Union. All very positive. Let's all come together and be loving and so on. The problem with it is that she really didn't have any kind of positive message to the great segment of the United States population that has been ruined and really has very little hope of going forward. Donald Trump, he brought that message in the campaign, and it pushed him over. And my guess is, knowing how Donald Trump appears to be, if he gets the flow of immigrants cut off from coming into the country on the argument that we've got people here who are unemployed, who are hurting financially, we need to get them to work. Makes sense. But then, of course, what will happen is those people who maybe get the jobs that the immigrants aren't going to be taking, they will find out that they're going to be treated in terms of income and working conditions pretty much the same way the immigrants get treated, or the citizens of China get treated over there when they're working in the factories, etc. And so, you have this inability of people to kind of critically think forward. And with climate change, to me, it's like back in 2015 when I heard Guy McPherson's message, it was like, okay, this guy makes a lot of sense. What he's saying is rational. What's the evidence? And then you go on his website, you read his monster essay, and he's citing all these journal articles. He's just synthesizing it, putting it together. And it's a pretty cogent argument. That's why you had him at the Sierra Club, Jamin, in the first place. And that's why, we kind of got together. But the problem is that that can't be debated like you might have in a political campaign or something. It's so, when I do start to go, and by nature, I'm much more of a kind of a person on the hypomanic edge, side of things rather than the depressive. But when I find myself, kind of going into despair about it, it's just like part of it is, how absolutely stupid are we, human species, that we just simply can't, get a grip on what is happening. And we're allowing, essentially psychopaths to be running the show. So, anything, I think that, I guess, sum it all up. There needs to be a negative message given, like, if you don't start to focus your attention on this, learn about it, educate yourself or get educated somehow, you're going to die. That's it. You're going to die. Your family's going to die. Your children, your grandchildren, they're going to die. And you will not have done a damn thing to prevent that from happening. It's like you were more interested in, watching TV or following your favorite sports team, and just, staying away from it. But the positive is, if you do get focused on what the danger is, maybe something could still be done. And why not go down fighting? Why not go down doing the right thing? But I think if you don't have that negative aspect to it, it's a problem. One final thing, and I'll shut up. In the United States, right, we got the issue over the Second Amendment. which is a big thing in the country, where you have a huge segment of the population, National Rifle Association, etc. And these individuals basically want to have access to firearms, and they argue and they believe that, as they sometimes put it, the Second Amendment is what keeps all the other amendments going. In other words, if the United States were to be disarmed, like what happened after the Russian Revolution, or when Hitler came to power, et cetera, then you're going to have unleashed tyranny and no means to really defend against it. Now, these individuals, yes, they're always thinking about the negative. I've got to defend my family and my children from criminals, or I've got to defend our country or our people from, a military police state type of operation. That galvanizes them. And I think it's the same. You can take that and you can apply it to climate change, where you have to see the threat and then you get galvanized politically. Okay, I've gone on. I'm done.
Thanks, Dan. All right, next up in the queue is Victoria. Dan, you want to get the echo going on? Victoria by Mild. I would love to volunteer Jamie into the queue as well. You haven't heard from Jamie in a bit, but anyway, next up is Victoria, followed by Miles. Hopefully, by Jamie. Thanks, Victoria. Take it away.
I would like to say that I absolutely agree with you, Dan, but that is the big conundrum. How do you communicate this message? As I said, I've had some time to research this week, and you have the experts in the field at different universities. I mean, this guy says, oh, this guy's an idiot because he says, yes, the ice will be gone by this time. But he's probably right, except I would never do that. And, going even to glaciologists in Europe and the whole thing, and it's like, how do you argue with that? But yet, I submit to you, this is not like any other message we've delivered. Certainly not like any advertising campaign I've ever worked on, or any university lecture that I might have written, because you're handing a message to someone like no other in history. And I think it is different. And I think that's why we're all struggling, in my opinion. Okay, this didn't work. What can we do? But I think it helps us to kind of look at it from all perspectives. This is a very unique message and information. And I think what I find perplexing is it's information that's out there and anyone could get it, as we all did. But I also forget that most people don't want to know. So I think that we all have an issue of thinking, how could they not want to know? Because maybe we could do something about it. So I just throw that out for discussion. I just think that it's if you look at the way communication and messages are even affected in the brain and emotion and fact, and this hits so many things that we have no history of dealing with something like this. So anyway.
Good stuff, Victoria. Really love the collective intelligence we've got assembled here. All right, next up is Miles, and I've volunteered Jamie for the queue. Take it away, Miles.
Thank you, Jamin. And Dan, I always enjoy listening to you talk. And to me, you take all the time you need, because your message is so important, and other people have echoed that. Because, at the end of the day, maybe this radish, if the only purpose it actually achieves is to help people comport themselves, that's the word of the day, comport. And that's what Guy McPherson is saying. At the end of the day, what does he say? At the edge of extinction, only love remains. And so if love is I believe, reconciliation, that it's essentially how do we comport ourselves? How do we treat each other? Are we being a life-affirming force, even in the face of extinction? And I'll just add, if you're so inclined, anyone listening to this, go check out Tom Hartman on his YouTube channel. He interviews Dar Jamail. I think he writes for Guardian, among others. Anyway, that's the word that he used. It's all about how are we going to comport ourselves, treat each other. Thank you.
Thanks, Miles. That was beautiful. I just want to acknowledge that with an experience when Jamin and I were picking up the plastic on the beach, a ladybug landed on my sweater, and we witnessed two ravens doing a beautiful, like a mating dance. And as Jamin was saying, it was like the birds, the life around us was really acknowledging this act of love that we were creating by picking up litter. So I really believe that, that we're all connected to this world, and that comportment of being at peace and acting in loving ways really does affect the whole of the world. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I'd just like to interject as well. When we are talking to the youth, like at Extinction Rebellion, to encourage them, to think about this, and that civil disobedience, as we have our own Jamie, your former retired drug enforcement agent, they're just going to pick you off. Take the high road, Extinction Rebellion. Even school strikes, I think the thing is to be very careful that, like somehow it is, I think with school strike, they're just walking out because the adults have failed them. Essentially they're still at school. They've just said, our school is out.
Good stuff. All right. Jamie, you want to jump in?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great stuff, everybody. And I actually have to sign off here in a second, but I will. When Victoria was speaking, I had a very interesting thought. And as always, Dan and Miles and everybody who contributes, today I spent a lot of time just thinking and listening. But Victoria pointed something out, and I want to expand on it. And I think that this is kind of a nugget that came to me listening quietly to everybody today. And here it is. Here's my nugget. While we're struggling to identify how the processes we need to use to get a hold of the right people that will join us with the right passion, think about the person with the glioblastoma brain tumor. Think about the person that gets a diagnosis with a tremendously bad medical condition. That's the only person that's going to spend the rest of their life attacking and researching. I'm not researching glioblastoma because no one in my family has it. But I've had 5 hip replacements, and I'm an expert on Teflon versus HDPE versus ceramic hip versus titanium versus cobalt, because I've read everything there is to read about it and every lawsuit involved in it. I could read it. I got a PhD in hips. I think what we need to do is try to find a way to find those people on the planet that equally are concerned about this topic and don't waste any more energy. Dan talked about energy, wasting energy on those people that don't want to talk about it. Because as you're walking through the halls of a hospital on your way in to get the diagnosis, you're very concerned. Then you get the diagnosis, then you're walking out of the same hospital. But once you get the diagnosis, the hospital doesn't feel the same anymore. Everything feels different. And the only thing you can do is research and treatment. And it may not work, but we've got to figure out a way. And I know we're fumbling clumsily at it. I'm in Cleveland. Jamin came in. We're all doing our part. Miles is, going to every event and talking to First Nations, and Melissa and Vicky. Everybody is doing wonderful work. Dan doesn't miss a trick. He's like a professor when we get on here. But let's use this platform as a collective intelligence to come up with solutions. So how do we get to the cancer patients? Those among us that understand Mother Earth has a fatal disease. If we can figure out that clue on how to grab a hold of those that believe Mother Earth has a fatal disease, we'll have found our people. And I'm going to mute and stay on for about 1 more minute.
Brilliant, Jamie. I love it. Brilliant. I love it. Let's see. I think I don't think there's anyone in the queue right now. Correct me if I'm wrong, or jump in if you're wanting to talk. But I think just to build on what Jamie is saying there, we've spent so much energy trying to talk to people who don't want to be talked to, who don't want in on this conversation. Really think you hit the nail on the head, Jamie. We've got to find the people who actually do want to be in on this conversation. And then related to that is, what is the conversation we want to have? Is it a negative one? Is it a positive one? Is it one about collective intelligence? Is it one about refreezing the Arctic and cooling the planet? Where do we start? Just think there have been those events that we've gone to, events on any myriad topics. There are those that we love, and there are those that didn't go so well. What was it about those that we loved? Go ahead, Jamie. Jump in, bro. Go ahead.
Well, I got to go.
Okay, gotcha. All right. Thanks so much for joining us, Jamie. Great stuff. So what? So I kind of want to break this down into two distinct questions. One, what is that micro tribe that we need to identify and invite, and what exactly are we inviting them to? Right? What kind of conversation? What series of conversations? What's the focus? What's the seminar, basically, that we're inviting them to? And I heard Sabrina laughing there, so I know I struck a chord because you're not muted. So who do we want to invite? And let's just open it up. Let's get rid of the queue and just kind of have a round the table discussion.
Well, I think that's actually what we are doing. I don't think that this is new. I think we've talked about this before. Mm-hmm. We've talked about moving outside of the United States and reaching out to our calm counterparts or people in Europe and other countries where they are doing work. I think we're already connecting with organizations and individuals who are like-minded, and I think it's just a question of continuing those relationships and building this. And I think what we're experiencing is this is a process, and it's a work of art, and we're learning through trial and error. And I don't think there's any one solution. I think there are going to be myriad solutions, and the more of us that get on board, the larger this can be. And but it is a process, and I don't think there's any way around that. I think a big one for the work you and Jamie and I have been doing is really to contact the Pope, get in touch with him. That will make this expand maybe faster. But I see that there is an inertia that's building more than before.
If I could just, one thought is we have in our, in Mexico, Central America, and South America. We have a situation where the ravages of climate change are exerting a pretty strong pressure on people having to leave where it is they live and have existed. You know, it's because of drought and inhospitable conditions for self-sustaining farming. People are being driven off of the land. You also have going on down there lots of human oppression and tyranny. And when we talk about, you know, again, we brought up in our discussions, you know, the indigenous peoples. Well, down there, you have lots of indigenous people in Mexico, Central America, South America, who've not fared all that well. I particularly found it interesting, you know, I forgot where I read it, but that, you know, in Venezuela, you know, socialist Venezuela, the economic failure, where actually, yeah, they're an economic failure because of all of the pressures that the United States has been exerting on that particular country. And to find out that this guy Maduro, and I forget the name of the guy who was president for a good stretch, maybe it was Chavez before. It was Chavez. You know, to find out that they're actually indigenous people, that they are not part of the, you know, Spanish conquering elite. And I think that, you know, there is some real potential of communication there, because, you know, what you have, whether it's in the Middle East, in Syria, or in southern Mexico, Central America, parts of South America, it's all happening in a very tangible way. And we ought to be able to come together and talk about what this reality is. You know, in other words, you know, the migrants who want to come into the United States, they are leaving really horrific conditions generally. And yet it's kind of treated in the United States in the corporate media like, oh, you know, it's this invasion of rapists and drug peddlers and human traffickers, etc. This kind of a narrative misses the reality on the ground, and it needs to be confronted. I can't, you know, if we're really going to solve it in any kind of period of time, there has to be peace between the various tribal forces in the world. And the tribalism is hardwired, whether it's an indigenous tribal grouping, or whether it's, you know, now a national thing like China, which is more than just a nation, or the, you know, Caucasian English-speaking large, powerful tribe. You know, there has to be a reconciliation. We need to restrain the tribalism, restrain the thought process that says if the other tribe could get their way, they would destroy us. They would bring us down. And maybe we need to do the same to them because that's what they want to do to us. That has to be dissolved. And people have to be able to come together in a cause of let's try to salvage the planet, or all of our tribes are going down. I mean, it's a disaster waiting to happen. And I think that, you know, there's language barriers. You know, how many people can speak Chinese? How many Chinese can speak English? You know, there's more possibilities with the Spanish-speaking peoples, you know, in North America, Central America, and South America. And so on, but this is something where these connections need to be made. And I look at radical collective intelligence as a concept, because I really, you know, I don't know the nuts and bolts of actually what it would be, but as a concept, it just seems like we ought to be able to get people together and to argue very strongly against tribalism, which isn't necessarily psychopathic, but it can become that way. The psychopathy, which is inherent in the neoliberal economic system, and the realities of climate. It's like, Jamin, when sometimes, you talk about we're going to have, I forget it, the compassionate companies, and we're going to, the idea of people coming together around the world is necessary here, because otherwise it doesn't really look like we're going to be able to do very much. And time is running out. If we
psychology is so important to this, I've learned. And psychology of the pyramid, the organization chart that's in the shape of a pyramid versus the psychology of a circle where people are all on the same level. That's, I think, where we have to have psychology at the fore in this conversation, as you bring, and that we need to offer people an alternative, because nobody wants, who are in the pyramids or in these org charts, nobody wants to lose their place in the pecking order, as you've pointed out in the past. And just ask a question of you. Have you ever found Peter Miller on YouTube? He's a psychologist, and he's interviewed Guy McPherson at least 3 times talking about psychology. You might find that very interesting. Peter Miller on YouTube.
I have seen those interviews. I didn't recognize the name Peter Miller until you said, with Guy McPherson, where he interviewed him 2 or 3 times. And again, you could kind of see the progression, and this Peter Miller, a psychologist, he's kind of talking about how on some levels he's been resistant to believing what it is Guy McPherson is saying, but at the same time, it's compelling. I mean, Guy McPherson, again, when I despair and I say to myself, he's put together such a powerful argument, and there's all sorts of other independent scientists who essentially are on board with it. Why haven't we had a debate about it? And then I say to myself, okay, well, let's ask why. What are the forces? What are the powers that be that stand in the way of it? Whether they have false beliefs or they just simply, don't really have any beliefs other than just, their own welfare, and of course their wonderful, family's welfare, and they can't get really beyond that. But it's just, why can't this be discussed? And there's just clearly forces from Donald Trump to the corporations that just can't turn off the greed and the money making. Again, I believe, where, yes, we do as human beings have this potential to be altruistic and to sacrifice for the good of community, including in historically, we can see so many situations where people give up their lives in order to protect and in some way ensure the existence of communities. We have that potential, but we also have the potential, even if we're not born on that side of the spectrum, to become psychopathic, which means that basically it's your self-interest, and maybe it's extended to your oh so wonderful family. And in addition to that, you tend to have a contempt for the other people. And it's always rationalized on the argument that if you were in a position to screw me over, you would. I know who you are. You're like me. I'm going to screw you over because I know you'd screw me over. It's just that, that's the way the thought process is. And when you have this system where it kind of legitimizes it, lets everybody be selfish, pursue our own interests, and then the invisible hand of the market will somehow make everything good. I mean, how stupid is that? And you know, in a sense, how immoral is it? And to just allow it to flourish. And I think everybody who's grown up or been socialized into the system has had to, in some way, adapt to it. You always become a little more over to the psychopathic side of things if you view it as part of survival. And I just feel when I went to work, you know, in mental health, and I, you know, most people who go into it are pretty altruistic, you know, in a sense, young people. But once you get into the system and you have to deal with the institution of psychiatry and the pharmaceutical industry and the corporate money that completely corrupts most everything in mental health to one degree or another, you have to, you know, you either are going to have to leave the career behind, or you have to become sort of into some kind of an appeasement mode to it, or you criticize it, but you know you can't, you know, as Jamie said, if you stand up too tall and make too much noise, you're going to be out, you know, and you know that you'll be out of a job and you won't be able to sustain yourself. So, you know, it's there. And I do think, you know, we just need to recognize that it's there and that it needs to be defeated. It will stand in the way of most good impulses. You know, people, if everybody understood, like, let's say, a good probability that Guy McPherson, whatever timetable you want to use, is correct. If people really understood that, my God, if I don't do something, it's not only me who's going down, but my children, my grandchildren, everything. We have to do something. Let's fight. Let's just do the best we can. But let's not sit back and listen to you know, cable news and the, you know, the sports or whatever, or the, you know, reality TV, which Donald Trump came out of. I mean, then people, you know, would do what they could do. And you know, the way we live in the United States, it's a political democracy, very corrupt, but it's still a political democracy. And you have these politicians who are empowered to make the laws, to deregulate, you know, to basically stand in the way of any kind of progress. And they need to be attacked. They need to be called out. I love, you know, I don't agree with everything that Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez is saying. You know, she's 29 years old, I think, you know, but again, you know, she's kind of like you know, the little kid pointing to the emperor and saying, you don't have any clothes on. You know, she's saying, you know, when she said, we maybe only have 12 years to fix this. And then they say she's lost her mind completely. How crazy is that, what she said? Or she says, maybe we need to have, you know, the marginal tax rates reinstated that we used to have in this country when there wasn't a real problem with it. And that, you know, having too many billionaires and such a concentration of wealth is actually immoral. It's just immoral. And there she is pointing her finger at the emperor. And you know, maybe, again, a combination of things will really push it forward. But it is, I just think that combining the kind of negative in the sense of, we have forces which will stand in the way of any positive. They don't mind it if you know, I'm all for being spiritual, and I try to put myself in a transcended space periodically. I really do, you know, because it's necessary for sanity. But the thing is, again, they don't have any problem with that. You know, you can be spiritual all you want. You can be religious all you want. You can be against racism all you want. I'm talking United States right now. You can be for sexual freedom all you want, etc., etc. But the one place you better not step up to is to criticize the corporate, really fascist control of the country. If you start pushing that way, you're going nowhere. And I just think it's really important to appreciate what's taboo, what is not allowed in this country is any kind of sustained criticism of corporate control, which means the money hoarding, the greed, and taking care of one's oh so wonderful family. And also, final word, just also understanding that the children of the elites, they have to be educated in a way that makes them accept the fact that they're getting so much in the way of wealth without really having to work for it. What is the reason for that? Why is it? Well, you know, it's usually because we're a superior breed of people. We deserve everything we have, and you do. And oh, and by the way, all those other people out there who you see struggling and you know, maybe they have drinking problems or drug problems or they're involved in underground, those are bad people. They're lazy. They can't control their behavior, and they don't, you know, and their condition is brought about by their own individual behaviors and choices. And this has to be drummed in, because the children of the elites will, just like any other child, grow up with an inborn sense of fairness. If, you know, if I have 4 pieces of candy or 4 toys, let's give each person one. You know, everybody gets one, and it's going to be not considered okay to give 3 to 1, 1 to someone else, and then 0 for the others. And so we have this whole kind of societal socialization, you know, process that needs to be confronted. And I'm going to get off my soapbox. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dan. I know Melissa has stuff she wants to say, but Victoria, I saw you had unmuted a while back. Did you want to jump in? Please do.
I didn't mean to unmute, but yeah, I'd just like to say, if I might, I so agree. This has been such a stimulating conversation for me, because I think we all get into inertia because it is what it is. But I love that we're here, keep been talking about it. And you know, it's how do we get their attention, whoever it is, whatever sector, how do we get their attention, deliver the message in a credible way that will be believed, and convince them that the whole world, we have to get all the leaders to act together right now, or we all die in a few years. And you guys think I'm kidding. I work on this a lot. It's like, how, you know, is that our message? Or I think, you know, when I think about, oh yes, a positive way, absolutely. And I think about what Jamie said about perhaps we just go and try to gather up those like us. That makes sense to me, because when I try to inform someone you know, I'm sending them to depression clinic, you know, which is just a really a harsh wake up, I think, for all of us who are trying to take action in a loving way. And that's why you guys are such a great support for me, because it's you all bring such perspectives and awareness, and I appreciate your intellect. That's what I just wanted to throw out.
Great stuff. Thank you, sister. And Melissa, you got something? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just wanted to read a quote out of the Pope Francis's encyclical, the Laudato Si. It's short, but he's talking about the time on the planet when there was a lot of destruction and injustice, and kind of a similar situation we're in now, but smaller scale. We see in this story of Noah, where God threatens to do away with humanity because of its constant failure to fulfill the requirements of justice and peace, in quotes. I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence. These ancient stories full of symbolism bear witness to a conviction which we share today, that everything is interconnected and that genuine care for our lives and our relationships with nature is inseparable from fraternity, justice, and faithfulness to others. Yeah, so I just wanted to share that, something to think about. I find it a great truth in that. Okay.
Beautiful. Wow. Well, so much to think about and noodle on. We've been here for 3 hours now. I've been here for 3 hours. Miles and I have been here for 3 hours and 20 minutes. So a good long stretch. I love it. I mean, because, you know, if you don't let the dishes soak in the dishwater for a while, it's not going to loosen up, right? So we've kind of got to stew in it. It feels like, you know, to get to some of these insights, because let's face it, when we're not on the social club at the end of the world, we're in this psychotic, weird reality, invented reality of we're all separate, we're all out here to hoard, and it's just ridiculous. So for me,
we all have to go make those dollars.
Right. We've all got to rape Mother Earth in order to extract oil, gas, timber, and steel in order to have something to take to market to trade for those dollars. Right. So, you know, this to me is an island of sanity. And if we do get out of this death spiral and save something of life on Earth, or a lot of life on Earth, it will be because of groups like this one that get together and say, wait a second, let's pause this crazy train that we're on, get off it for a few hours, and figure out the beginnings of a new course, a new pathway.
You all might want to check out the 13 grandmothers. They're indigenous matriarchal women, matriarchs, who are doing work for healing on the planet as well. So check them out. There's info online about them.
Yeah, I'll just say goodbye to everybody. And, you know, these videos are very powerful ways of telling people, if they want to understand what you're about, to just say, here, watch this, you know, and then say, now, do you want to have a conversation with me? That's how I'm using these things. It's how I use my Twitter and now my LinkedIn. And I just tell people I'm very transparent. Just check it out, and then we can talk.
Yeah.
So thanks very much.
Beautiful.
Absolutely. Thank you, Miles.
Thank you, guys.
All right.
Yeah, and I'm going to say goodbye as we're doing. And normally I can't stay for this long of a stretch of time as today, but thanks to the polar vortex, I canceled. I'm kind of hanging out mostly indoors, and they're not going out. But anyway, it was really enjoyable, and I look forward to getting together with everybody next week.
Hey, Dan, how do the birds survive the polar vortex?
I don't see very many birds out there, right now. And I think what they maybe do is they try to get, situated around places where there is heat, coming out. I've noted that. But, we haven't had anything like, again, this is maybe going to set a record here and then they're saying, when the weekend comes, it's going to be back, it's going up in the 40s. So, but, and then everything will melt. But anyway, yeah. So, again, I look forward to seeing everybody next week. I'm signing out, and take care.
Great. Thanks so much, Dan. Great to see you. Miles, great to see you, buddy. Thanks for sticking it out for the whole marathon and all your great contributions.
Thanks, Jamin. It was great. See you next week.
See you, Miles. Thank you.
See you soon.
Bye.
All right. Take care. All right, sweetie. It's just you and me at the end of the world.
Yeah. Awesome. I'll play a game of backgammon.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
See you guys.
All right. Great to see you all. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Thanks.